Here's a short, punchy hook for your story. She once called him nothing, yet somehow, she left me for him. It's concise, emotionally charged, and instantly sparks curiosity while highlighting the tension and age gap romance theme. I can also give 3 alternative hooks if you want to test which grabs viewers best. Do you want me to? From the moment she walked into the room, there was a presence about her that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't loud or demanding, it was quieter, subtle, but undeniably magnetic. She moved with a grace that seemed effortless, like the world bent slightly around her without her ever noticing. Her dress, light and flowing, caught the sun in a way that made the thread shimmer. Each step was measured yet fluid, a gentle rhythm that seemed to pull my attention without me wanting it. I felt myself noticing the smallest details, the tilt of her head when she laughed, the way her fingers grazed the edge of a cup, how her hair fell softly across one shoulder, catching the light in a coppery glow. I stayed at a distance at first, not wanting to intrude, but my eyes followed her. It wasn't just physical beauty, though that was undeniable, it was the quiet confidence she carried, the kind that comes from life experience. She spoke to people with ease, listening more than talking, and yet somehow leaving a lasting impression with just a look, a nod, or a slight smile. I found myself measuring my own words before I spoke, aware that they might sound clumsy or too young, too eager. There was a part of me that admired her, deeply, almost painfully. She seemed so assured, so sure of herself, while I felt like I was constantly calculating, constantly observing. And yet, there was also a shadow in her eyes, a subtle hesitation I could sense if I looked closely enough. It wasn't sorrow or anger, it was something quieter, something hidden, like a secret she carried even while laughing. I wanted to reach out, to bridge that space, but my own insecurities kept me silent. I was aware of him, the other man. I saw the way she glanced at him sometimes, the brief spark in her eyes, and it made something in my chest twist. Even so, I couldn't stop noticing her. When she laughed at a joke I didn't tell, my chest tightened with a strange mix of jealousy and admiration. When she leaned slightly closer to someone else, I felt the warmth of absence, like a hand slipping from mine before I'd ever held it. And yet, when she happened to look in my direction, even for a brief second, there was a flicker, a quiet acknowledgement, that sent a rush of something I didn't have words for through me. I stayed there, observing, silently wishing I could be braver, wishing I could match the ease with which she carried herself. There was a strange beauty in the distance between us, in the way I could admire her without touching, without being a part of her world yet. My thoughts were a tangle of longing and hesitation, awareness and restraint. Every movement she made, every gesture, every soft laugh, it carved itself into my memory. I knew even then that she would linger in my mind long after that moment passed, like sunlight that refuses to fade completely at the end of the day. It started with a small, quiet moment, nothing dramatic, but enough to make my heart race. We were sitting at a corner table in that tiny cafe she liked, the kind with wooden chairs that creaked under your weight and the faint aroma of freshly baked bread mixing with strong coffee. Sunlight filtered through the window, catching the dust in the air, and for a moment, it felt like the world had slowed just enough for us to exist in a little bubble of warmth. She spoke with that easy confidence that made everything she said sound important, even when it was something ordinary. I listened more than I spoke, but when I did, she tilted her head slightly, letting her hair fall just enough to brush her cheek against the sunlight. And then, without warning, her hand brushed mine as she reached for her cup. It was brief, almost accidental, but the warmth of her fingers lingering against mine sent a subtle shock through me. My chest tightened, and I was acutely aware of the rhythm of my own heartbeat, loud and uneven in my ears. She laughed at something I said, a joke I hadn't expected to be funny, and leaned slightly closer, her shoulder brushing mine. The closeness wasn't forceful, it was gentle, natural, almost casual. And yet, it carried a weight that neither of us acknowledged. Her presence had this uncanny ability to make the air around me feel heavier, warmer, as if it remembered the space her body occupied even after she moved. Every glance, every tilt of her head, every soft smile sent tiny sparks of unspoken connection through me. I wanted to say something, anything, to let her know I felt it, but words seemed too clumsy for this quiet intimacy. At one point, she reached across the table to point at a book I'd brought, her fingertips brushing the back of my hand. That fleeting touch lingered in my mind far longer than the moment itself. I could feel the gentle steadiness of her energy, the subtle warmth that came without intention. I wondered if she knew how much these tiny gestures mattered, how deeply they etched themselves into my memory. And yet, even in this closeness, there was distance, a subtle reminder that she belonged to her own world, one I could admire but not fully enter. Her eyes sometimes wandered, a flicker of thoughtfulness, perhaps a secret worry, or maybe another person occupying her mind. I didn't dare ask. Instead, I drank in every detail, the curve of her smile, the faint scent of jasmine lingering in her hair, the soft brush of her sleeve against my arm. These were small moments, yet they were monumental in their impact, the kind of moments that made my chest ache with longing I couldn't name. By the time we parted, I felt both elated and hollow. The taste of connection lingered on my skin like warmth from a fire, but the knowledge that it wasn't fully mine settled in the pit of my stomach. There was something thrilling and terrifying in these small moments, a closeness that felt intimate yet fragile, a dance of distance and affection that left me dizzy, wanting more but knowing I might never have it. Even walking away, I could feel her presence lingering, as though the air itself remembered the brush of her fingers and the soft sound of her laughter. It was intoxicating and bittersweet, a first real taste of connection that promised more but warned of boundaries I wasn't yet ready to cross. It was impossible not to notice him, the other man, the one who seemed to slip so effortlessly into her orbit. At first, I tried to ignore it, telling myself that I was reading too much into casual gestures, friendly smiles, or the way they laughed together. But the truth was unavoidable. There was a different warmth in her eyes when she looked at him, a subtle spark I had never quite seen directed at me. It wasn't brazen or flashy, it was quiet, understated, yet undeniable, like a soft light flickering across a dark room. I remember one afternoon, standing just across the room, watching them. She leaned forward slightly, her hand brushing his arm as she laughed at something he said. That brief contact lingered, as if reluctant to let go, and the way her eyes met his carried a depth of attention that made my chest tighten. My own hands, which had felt steady moments before, now fidgeted, clenching slightly as if I could somehow grasp the fleeting warmth she offered elsewhere. It wasn't just physical gestures that struck me, it was the way she listened to him, the tilt of her head, the soft nods, the pauses she allowed him as if his words were the most important sounds in the world. I had seen her do this with me in smaller doses, brief acknowledgments, fleeting touches, a momentary closeness. But with him, it was as though the space between them held a quiet electricity, a connection that demanded attention without asking permission. Even in her smiles, I noticed subtle differences. My own had always been met with warmth, but with him, her smiles lingered longer, softer, eyes crinkling at the corners in a way that felt intimate and effortless. I found myself obsessing over these small contrasts, the lightness in her voice, the way her fingers curved around his in a way they never did around mine, the easy rhythm of their laughter together. Each observation cut deeper than I wanted to admit, a mixture of jealousy, longing, and helpless admiration twisting in my chest. I began noticing patterns, little rituals that I had missed before, the way she always sought his opinion first, the casual but deliberate proximity when they walked together, the quiet shared jokes that left me feeling like an outsider peering through a window. It was impossible not to feel the threat, though I never confronted it. I told myself she didn't mean to hurt me, that human connection was complicated, yet the sharp sting of being on the periphery was undeniable. And still, I could not bring myself to resent him entirely. There was something in the way she looked at him that spoke to her own needs and desires, something I could neither claim nor control. I was left with the quiet ache of awareness, the deep understanding that admiration and desire sometimes exist alongside reality, unfulfilled yet impossible to deny. Even as I observed from a distance, I found myself recalling moments she had offered me, a brush of her hand, a shared laugh, a fleeting glance, and comparing them silently to what she gave him. The contrast hurt, but it also sharpened my own emotions, making me painfully aware of the intensity of connection, the fragility of intimacy, and the slow, creeping tension that would define what came next. It was late one evening, the kind of quiet night that presses in gently, leaving the world hushed except for the occasional distant hum of a car or the soft whisper of wind through the trees. We found ourselves walking along the edge of the park, far enough from the city's glow that the stars felt like they were spilling just for us. There was a comfortable silence at first, the kind that wasn't awkward but heavy with unspoken thoughts. My chest tightened as I realized I could no longer hold back the words I had kept buried. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool air brush my face, and tried to let my voice sound calm, even though it quivered slightly. I need to tell you something, I started, my fingers brushing against the strap of my bag. Her eyes softened immediately, giving me the quiet encouragement I both needed and feared. The way the moonlight fell across her features made everything about her seem impossible and essential at the same time, the curve of her cheek, the softness of her lips, the way her hair caught the faint glow like strands of gold. I admire you, I admitted, the words catching somewhere in my throat. More than I probably should. And I think I care about you. More than I should. My hands twisted in the pockets of my jacket, small tremors betraying the tension in my chest. I couldn't look directly at her for fear she would see the vulnerability I had tried so hard to hide. For a moment, she was quiet, just watching me with those calm, discerning eyes. Then she reached out, her fingers lightly brushing my arm, a touch that was warm and steady but deliberate in its gentleness. I know, she said softly. Her voice was tender, full of something that felt like care but also an unspoken boundary. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes, a subtle distance remaining. I like you, she continued, but not in the way you hope. You're someone I value, someone I enjoy being with, but my heart, it's elsewhere. Her hand lingered for a brief second before falling back to her side, leaving me acutely aware of the warmth that had just slipped away. It wasn't cruel, not in the least, it was honest, gentle, and painfully kind. I nodded, swallowing hard, trying to keep the sudden ache in my chest from showing. The night seemed to stretch longer, the cool air pressing against my skin, the distant rustle of leaves underscoring the quiet tension between us. I could feel the faint echo of her hand on my arm lingering, and it was maddening, a reminder of the intimacy we had shared, and the barrier that still stood between us. I understand, I said finally, my voice steadying. It was the truth, even if it hurt more than I could admit. We continued walking in silence, our steps in rhythm, yet the space between us felt both intimate and impossibly wide. My chest ached with longing, yet there was a strange comfort in her honesty, a subtle affirmation that even in rejection, there was connection, care, and respect. By the time we parted that night, I was left with a quiet ache, a mixture of warmth and emptiness, the taste of closeness mingled with the bitterness of knowing it could never fully be mine. That night planted a seed of longing I couldn't ignore, a tension that would shape everything to come. It hit me quietly, almost without warning, one ordinary afternoon. I had come by her favorite little bookshop, the one tucked into a narrow street where the sunlight pooled lazily over the wooden floors, casting warm patches across the shelves. I thought I might catch a smile, a moment of connection, perhaps even a fleeting glance that belonged only to me. Instead, I saw her with him. They were standing close, just far enough to seem casual, yet every gesture between them carried a weight I could feel pressing against my chest. She laughed at something he said, a soft, airy sound that seemed to linger in the space between them. Her fingers rested lightly on his arm, not in friendship, but in an intimacy that belonged to them alone. My chest tightened as I realized the subtle truth I had been avoiding, she was moving toward him, and there was nothing I could do to change it. Even the way she looked at him made my stomach knot. Her eyes softened, crinkling just slightly at the corners as she tilted her head, fully present in his world. I could see the quiet trust in her expression, the kind of attention I had longed for but had never been fully granted. Every laugh, every brush of her hand against his, every shared glance was a reminder that she had chosen him, and I was only allowed to watch from the sidelines. I tried to focus on other details, anything that might anchor me, but it was impossible. The sunlight reflecting off her hair, the gentle sway of her dress as she moved, the soft music drifting from the record player in the corner, all of it was tainted by the ache of awareness. I felt a hollowing in my chest, a slow, creeping grief that made each breath feel heavier. Even the memory of her hand brushing mine weeks before seemed to mock me now, a fleeting intimacy I had misread, cherished in vain. There was no anger, not really. It wasn't a betrayal in the way stories often told. It was simply reality. Her heart, her desire, belonged elsewhere. And yet, the ache was real, sharp, and almost physical. I realized then how much I had invested in the quiet moments we shared, in the gestures, the laughter, the fleeting touches. They were beautiful, yes, but they had never promised more than what they were, fragments, glimpses, shadows of connection. I left the shop quietly, my steps slow, the world around me suddenly sharper and more vivid. The smell of old books, the warmth of sunlight on my face, even the faint brush of wind against my skin, everything seemed to echo the loss I felt inside. Yet, beneath the pain, there was a strange clarity. I understood, perhaps for the first time, that love isn't always about possession, and closeness doesn't always guarantee belonging. That day marked a fracture, a moment of emotional truth I could no longer deny. She had made her choice, and I was left to reconcile my feelings, admiration, longing, grief, with the reality of her affection for someone else. It was a quiet heartbreak, the kind that leaves an imprint on your chest, a lingering ache that colors every memory and every glance moving forward. Even then, though, I couldn't help but remember her warmth, her laughter, the lightness in her gestures. It was bittersweet, an ache, yes, but also a recognition of the beauty of what had existed, however briefly, and a subtle lesson in the fragility and complexity of human connection. The days that followed her leaving were quiet in a way that felt unnatural at first, almost as if the world itself had paused to let me process the weight of what had happened. The ache in my chest hadn't disappeared, it lingered, subtle but persistent, like the faint echo of music from a room I could no longer enter. Yet, over time, the sharp edges began to dull, replaced by a reflective stillness that felt strangely warm. I found myself thinking back on the moments we had shared, not with bitterness or regret, but with a careful, almost reverent attention. The brush of her fingers against mine at the cafe, the soft tilt of her head when she laughed, the faint scent of jasmine in her hair, these were memories that didn't sting as much as they once had. Instead, they felt like gentle imprints, reminders that even fleeting connection could leave a lasting mark on the heart. It was in these quiet reflections that I began to understand her in a deeper way. She hadn't left me out of cruelty or indifference, she had followed the path her heart compelled her to take. Her choice was hers alone, shaped by desire, comfort, and the unique rhythm of her emotions. And while that path didn't include me, it didn't erase the tenderness she had shown, the moments of intimacy that had taught me something profound about the way humans touch each other's lives. I started noticing the small ways in which the ache transformed into something softer. A memory of her laugh no longer made my chest tighten, it made me smile faintly, remembering the warmth it carried. The image of her hand brushing his arm no longer burned with jealousy, it settled into my mind as a quiet testament to her humanity, her capacity to give and receive affection, to choose where her heart belonged. I could acknowledge her happiness without it diminishing the beauty of what we had shared. Walking through familiar streets, passing the little cafe, or noticing the sunlight catch on the curve of a tree branch, I began to sense her presence differently, not as a loss or a longing, but as a quiet companion in memory. I realized that connection, even unreciprocated, could be a source of growth, a mirror reflecting my own capacity for feeling, for care, and for understanding. It was strange, the way acceptance could feel both light and heavy at once. I felt a certain peace, yes, but also a lingering ache that reminded me I had loved deeply, even without possession. I began to smile at the thought of her life continuing, her heart following its own compass, and I could imagine her laughter, her gestures, the warmth of her being thriving in a way I would always admire but never claim. By the end of this reflection, I felt a subtle shift within myself. The ache remained, but it was no longer painful, it had transformed into something tender, almost nurturing. I had been given the gift of witnessing her light, even briefly, and in that witnessing, I discovered a quiet strength within myself. There was no need for bitterness, no need for regret, only the gentle understanding that love could be experienced fully, even when it was not returned in the way I had hoped. In letting go, I found a strange freedom, a clarity that allowed me to treasure connection for what it was, not what I wanted it to be. And in that freedom, I felt the faint stirrings of hope, that hearts, even bruised, could continue to beat with warmth, remembrance, and the quiet, enduring capacity for love. I saw them together one afternoon, and the moment stayed with me longer than I expected. It was in that little park we had sometimes walked through, the sunlight dappled and gentle, the breeze carrying the faint scent of late-blooming flowers. They were sitting on a bench, side by side, their bodies angled toward each other in that quiet, easy intimacy I had once longed for. She laughed, softly, and he leaned just enough toward her, responding with a smile that seemed to fit her perfectly. At first, my chest tightened, the familiar pang of longing flickering to life. But as I watched them, something shifted. The warmth in her smile, the relaxed comfort in their posture, even the playful tilt of her head toward him, it wasn't a threat to me. It wasn't a loss in the bitter sense. It was simply life unfolding the way it was meant to, and I was a witness to it, not a participant. I remembered our moments, the soft touch of her hand, the laughter shared across a cafe table, the quiet conversations under starlit skies. Those moments had been mine, even if fleeting, even if incomplete. They hadn't been erased, they existed in memory, in the small, tender spaces of my heart. And that realization made me smile softly, a smile tinged with melancholy but also with acceptance. Her hair caught the sunlight as she turned toward him, and I could almost feel the warmth radiating from her presence, the same warmth I had once experienced when she leaned close to me. It was the same light, the same gentleness, but it was now shared fully with someone else. And yet, the sight didn't sting. It was beautiful. It was human. It was right. I felt my chest relax, the tension of weeks dissolving into quiet understanding. Love, I realized, wasn't about possession. It was about connection, about recognizing beauty and warmth where it exists, even if it isn't directed at you. I could treasure her happiness without it diminishing my own worth, without it negating the value of what we had shared. For the first time in a long while, I let myself breathe fully. The ache of longing softened into a tender nostalgia, the kind that reminds you of the capacity of the heart to feel deeply, without expectation or claim. I could remember her laughter, the brush of her fingers, the quiet strength in her presence, and carry it with me like a gentle ember, warm, sustaining, alive. I walked past them, a few steps removed, but I carried no bitterness. Instead, there was a quiet gratitude, for having known her, for having felt the intensity of closeness, for having glimpsed the depth of human connection. Life continued around me, leaves rustled, sunlight shifted, distant laughter echoed, and it was all somehow richer for what I had experienced, even if the story wasn't mine to hold. By the time I left the park, I felt a profound sense of closure. The tension, the longing, the subtle ache of unfulfilled desire had transformed into a calm, warm understanding. I had witnessed love in its quiet, fragile beauty, and in doing so, I had learned something essential about life, about connection, and about the resilience of the heart. And though she belonged to someone else now, her presence, and what it had stirred within me, would always remain, gently, quietly, unforgettably.